Welcome to our virtual hotspot presentation. The Museum Village Düppel, based on the excavations of a medieval settlement, is not only a very popular open-air museum in Berlin, but also an open-air laboratory for reconstructive and experimental archaeology. From the very beginning, the Museum Village Düppel had strong ties to different research institutions and universities in Berlin. Although some of the ties were lost, they have been renewed during the last few years, and we are involved in a number of interesting research projects. In the next 15 minutes, I will introduce 3 examples of projects happening or starting at Düppel in 2021. Textile hemp, a new research project in Düppel. During the excavations at the medieval settlement, pollen cores were taken from 2 different wells on the site, as well as from a silted-up glacial relic lake, the Krummes Fen, at the western edge of the settlement. The results showed that rye, as well as hemp, were the 2 most numerous crop plants captured in the pollen cores. As the concept of the museum village has always been to reconstruct an entire model landscape based on the excavation results, the cultivation of textile hemp should be part of the presentation for visitors. Another reason, however, is the cultivation for research purposes, both for reconstructive and experimental archaeology. Textile hemp has been grown before at Düppel in the 1980s. The hemp plants were seized by police as they were cultivated without permission. Even for the cultivation of textile hemp, there are strict regulations, and a permit is needed from the Bundesopiumstelle, the Federal Narcotics Agency in Bonn. There are different permits depending on the reason for cultivation, either for an agricultural crop or for research. During the application process for research permit, we had to describe and ensure that all plant material can be locked up or destroyed when not used for experiments. The entire process has to be documented, and access from unauthorized persons has to be restricted. A very strict procedure indeed, so that we are particularly happy that we received the permission. There is a variety of potential archaeological evidence for hemp cultivation and use. Evidence from soil samples taken near or on settlement sites, as during excavations at Düppel, can yield hemp pollen. If present in higher proportions, it can be a clear indication for cultivation. Besides the micro-evidence in the shape of pollen, careful excavation using flotation can also uncover macro plant remains like hemp seeds, often surviving as charred remains. In anaerobic conditions, hemp fiber can survive as well, although it is very difficult to distinguish it from flax fiber. The last category are impressions on pottery from either textiles, cordage or grains. However, not all evidence is beyond doubt, as plant fibers, let alone their impressions, are particularly difficult to distinguish. There will be 3 main areas of experimental research: reconstructing the production sequence and monitoring the traces different techniques leave in the finished hemp fiber or textiles, carrying out taphonomic experiments with hemp seeds and hemp fiber, as well as creating a reference collection of pottery impressions, and lastly, analyzing the dispersal of hemp pollen around the plants. As this is the first year of the project, the main focus in 2021 will lie on gaining experience. No meaningful experiments can be designed if the production process has not been experienced practically. Using ethnographic sources, the production sequence will be reconstructed, monitoring the traces different techniques leave in the finished hemp fiber. Each step will be documented in writing and through photographs, if deemed useful also in the form of videos. The results of the first season will be used to design a series of experiments to be carried out from 2022 onwards. To better understand the archaeological evidence surrounding hemp remains, a series of taphonomic experiments investigating the transformation of hemp seeds and fiber under different conditions will be designed this year and carried out in the future. Degrees of charring as well as survival rate in different soil conditions will be tested in long-term experiments. In order to refine the identification of hemp impressions, a reference collection of seed impressions as well as textile impressions will be created, documented and published in cooperation with the Düppel Pottery Group. In cooperation with researchers from the Deutsches Archäologisches Institut, DAI, German Archaeological Institute, the dispersal of pollen will be investigated. Soil samples will be taken along a transect with increasing distance from the hemp plants. Samples will be taken along the same transect before sowing the hemp and at regular intervals during the growth and flowering periods. The hidden data in open-air museums. While interpreting data from excavations, archaeologists constantly have to make assumptions regarding house construction as well as the production and use of objects. These assumptions are rarely tested in the material world, as this would need experience, time and money. At the same time, staff and volunteers at archaeological open-air museums have been building reconstructed houses and making and using replica prehistoric and historic objects for decades. The full potential of this data treasure is not being used, as many open-air museums do not have the resources to document. Of course, there are several open-air museums who do document, but each one using different techniques. However, the larger the sample size, the more valuable the data is for research. To achieve this, archaeological open-air museums would have to use standardized and comparable documentation techniques. In 2017, I gave a paper on the topic of documentation at the XR conference in Xanten in Germany. I ended my talk with a call to cooperate on this topic. A number of colleagues were very interested. One of the most enthusiastic ones was Roland Padekoper. Through his extensive network, the idea took off, and XArch coordinated an EU application for a project on the wider topic of documentation via the Creative Europe funding scheme called Retold. The Retold project will develop standardized workflows to collect, digitize and share data on buildings, crafts and traditions. This will ensure better quality research through more comparable data, the preservation of tacit cultural heritage knowledge, and opportunities for more engaging and impactful storytelling about cultural heritage to the general public. The Retold partners are of course XArch as coordinators, the University of Barcelona, the Open Air Museum Astra in Romania, the Stone Age Park in Dithmarschen, Germany, the digital media content production company Nuva in Ireland, and the Museum Village Düppel of the City Museum, Berlin. One of the project's work packages is the development of documentation instruments and strategies. This part is coordinated by the Museum Village Düppel with a lot of input from Astra in Romania and the University of Barcelona. Looking at existing documentation strategies from a number of other open-air museums, draft forms will be designed for documenting existing reconstructions at regular intervals, as well as forms for new reconstructions. The forms will be tested by volunteers at Düppel and other partners. The aim is to design forms and documentation protocols which are very simple but at the same time cover the basics needed for comparable data collection. Developing standardized methods on the documentation of crafts is even more of a challenge, as a lot of the locked-in knowledge is non-verbal. In this case, videos must be part of the documentation procedure. Additionally, existing ethnographic documentation techniques will be looked at and, if suitable, adapted for our purpose. Again, the design protocols will be evaluated in cooperation with the volunteers at Düppel. Reconstructing a living cultural landscape. The last project introduced today is the backbreeding program of the Düppel grazing pigs. The reconstruction of a cultural landscape would not be complete without animals. Therefore, from the very beginning, old breeds were part of the museum concept at Düppel. Based on the animal bone assemblage from the excavation, sheep, oxen and pigs were thought suitable animals to keep. For the choice of breed, the Scientific Advisory Board of the Museum Village Düppel looked at medieval depictions of these animals. For sheep and oxen, old breeds still existing today were found, which looked like medieval depictions. However, for the pigs it was a different matter, as in the 1980s there were no grazing pigs left, which were similar to medieval depictions. The geneticist Professor Plache was part of the advisory board and the Society of the Museum Village. He started a backbreeding program to obtain a new breed of pig which shared its characteristics with the medieval depictions. He began crossing wild boar with Mangalica or woolly pig and the Husum red peat. The resulting Düppeler Weideschweine, or Düppel grazing pigs, became quite famous in Germany and really do look like depictions from the Middle Ages. At some point, the breeding program was unfortunately somewhat neglected. Breeding partners in Germany stopped breeding Düppler pigs, so that in 2015 the population at Düppel itself was almost the last genetic resource still in existence. To safeguard this valuable genetic heritage, we started the project Düppel Pig 2.0, networking with other partners in order to have different breeding locations and to diversify the genetic pool. As can be seen on this photo, the Düppel skull has a clear intermediate shape between the narrower skull of the wild boar and the broad skull of the industrial pig. The skull of the Düppel pigs is also very similar to excavated medieval pig skulls, an indication that the breeding program was very successful. This winter we had quite a scare, as the swine fever is getting closer to Berlin. The district veterinary inspection office declared that the state of our stables was insufficient in case of a nearby find of swine fever. To protect our valuable pigs, we drove them to our project partner, the Open Air Lab Lorsch near Frankfurt, effectively evacuating our pigs. At the moment we are raising funds for a new stable. Not an easy task in times of COVID, but we are getting there. Now enjoy the rest of this wonderful and innovative conference. Thank you for listening and stay safe.